Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Modern with Randy. I am Randy. Today we're talking about Pioneer's metagame. Do we need bans? Do we need anything to happen to it? Is it in a good form? Is it in a good stable spot? What do we know? What do we think? Basically, as always, guys, if you like what I'm doing, you like what you're seeing, go ahead and give a like to the video, subscribe to the channel. It really helps me grow, and I appreciate all the support I've gotten from you guys so far. That being said, getting into Pioneer, so breaking down Pioneer's metagame here for about the last 30 days. This is from MTG Goldfish. We have Rakdos Vampires, which has steadily been at the top of the list, if not first or second place almost, since the inception of it at the Pro Tour, where it came out and was kind of the breakout deck of the format. Right now it's sitting at 22% of the meta basically, based off the last 30 days between leagues, challenges, things like that. So definitely a dominant deck. Maybe a little too dominant too. I mean, taking up 22% of the meta by itself is definitely a problem. We saw this happen with Rhinos in Modern, not Legacy. Rhinos is never that good in Legacy. We saw this happen in Modern, where they were calling for bans, and we had something banned out of that deck. We've seen it happen before in like standard formats and different Modern formats as well. So 22% of the meta is a lot to kind of take over, and is basically a fourth of the decks you can expect in a tournament. And then we have the Asban Amalia combo running around is 16%, 17%, however you want to round that up or down. Deck has definitely been doing well. It has been kind of a contention since the last ban announcement list or banning announcement, when we had it notated that Wizards was kind of watching that deck and waiting to see what kind of happens with it. She does cause a lot of unintentional draws in games where you have to play 4, 5, 6 games to finish out a match, as well as she has kind of hindered the aggro decks of the format essentially. We kind of saw Slick Shot come out of Thunder Junction, make a big splash, and then immediately kind of die away because Amalia was still a deck. And then we have Izzet Phoenix, which has kind of consistently been about 10 to 12% of the meta, so it's sitting right now at 12.5%. Not too surprising. I mean, also if you notice, these are the top 5 decks of the last 30 days. It is also the cheapest deck by kind of a wide margin. If you look at the numbers, it is at least $77 to $80 cheaper than the next deck. So it's not too surprising to see that it is a big percentage of the meta. It's also a fun deck to play. Now, there's a lot of contention. Does Treasure Cruise need to be banned? Is that too powerful for the deck? Is it just too consistent? These are questions that do need to be answered. And then we have Nykthos Ramp or Mono Green kind of rising back up into popularity, sitting at like 7% of the meta. I don't necessarily think Nykthos is maybe too strong. I think it's one of those weird decks where, yes, it can do really well. Yes, it can be really dominant. I've also played the deck and lost myself from this, I got Thoughtseize turn 1 and then never drew another payoff card, and just kind of sat there and floundered with a couple mana dorks and nothing else. So hard to say if that deck really needs anything hit. Obviously, it's only 7% of the meta. A little hard to justify banning something. A lot of people have called for Nykthos, Shrine of Nyx to get banned. They've wanted it banned. And then we have Exordius Control at 5% of the meta. I can't say Exordius Control needs anything banned out of it. It's 5% of the meta. I think it's a healthy percent. People have feel bad for losing to Control because they don't like it, things like that. But no one's really ever complaining about Control being too powerful. No one's ever like, oh, Control needs banned, it's too powerful. It's never too powerful, really. As well as I think Exordius Control will do better in DC with it being open deck list. You kind of have a better chance of mulliging what you need to, knowing if you're up against the aggro deck, or you're up against the mid-range deck, or you're up against the control deck, you need to mulligan to essentially what you need to keep, what you don't need to keep. I do think Exordius Control will be better in DC than the average deck. Same thing with Abzan. I think it's to keep kind of a little looser hands or more tighter hands depending on what they're up against. If they're up against the aggro decks, they know they can keep kind of like the more the all-in hands, right? You're playing against Gruul aggro, you can keep the 1-drop, 2-drop, 2-drop basically. It seems like 1-drop, 2-drop, 2-drop, but into comboing off with Amalia on turn 3 to just win the game on the spot. As compared if you're up against Rakdos Vampires, you're not trying to combo off on turn 3 because they're going to have Thoughtseize, they're going to have spot removal, things like that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the DC, barring any kind of bannings or unbannings or anything of that nature. But let's break down why this deck is the top deck. Rakdos Vampires. Basically, you get to play a one-sided show and tell with this deck. For anyone who doesn't know what this deck does, or for some reason hasn't kept up with the format, or whatever the reason is, Sorin Imperious Bloodlord is a 3-mana planeswalker with a -2 ability, or I'm sorry, -3 ability, where you can put a vampire from your hand into play. Notably, you're going to be putting Vein Ripper into play. He is a 6-mana, 3 generic, 3 black, 6/5 flying with a ward ability of sacrifice a creature, and then whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So he essentially is just a one-sided show and tell that you also get to play along with Thoughtseize and Spot Removal, and then some other vampire creatures as well, being Bloodtide Harvester. We've seen this card played for ever. Basically, since Rakdos has been the deck, Bloodtide Harvester has been there because this is a good 2-mana creature, good value, makes a blood, able to kill some creatures, awesome card. Along with Dust Legionnaire Zealot. One day I'll get that right correctly. Basically, it's a 2-drop that lets you draw a card for life. Preacher of the Schism. If you played any kind of standard recently or in the past 6 months to a year, you know why that card's seeing play. They're also, we have Reckoner Bankbuster for card advantage, Kalidas, Shieldred, and then Fatal Push, and Bitter Triumph, Sheldred's Edict, as well as the other Spot Removal. Our land base here that has Cavern of Souls to help against the counter decks. We have Mutavault as well against the board wipes, and we're playing 4 Fables because that card is absolutely busted. And the sideboard has changed a variety of ways. I'm not going to really go over this sideboard because it all depends on what you're seeing. Some of the cards you can for sure always expect to see, though, is like Knight of Dust Shadow for the Amalia matchup, same thing like a Path of Perils, or Sanction Event, some kind of sweepers in the sideboard. Same thing with the Dampening Spheres for like the mono green deck, and like Ley Lines of the Void, or some kind of graveyard hate for for the Phoenix deck. I don't know why Phoenix was the name that escaped me. But as you can see, this deck is very well put together. It has a lot of 1-drop into 2-drop into 3-drop type effects where you're just grinding out and you're better than what your opponent can do in the mid to late game, as well as this an accidental I win on turn 3 button with Sorin. Like, obviously it's not a guaranteed game over, but it is hard for most of the decks in the format to kind of deal with Vein Ripper on 3. That is a challenge for almost every deck in the format to face. There's a reason why this deck is number 1 and why it has seen so much play. Now to essentially what most people call the boogeyman of the format, or I guess this kind of like one of the hated decks of the format really is Amalia. It's kind of become one of the most hated decks of this format, mainly for just the fact of it's a combo deck. It's really resilient despite what it looks like on paper. It looks like one board wipe or a couple spot removal spells, this deck would kind of fold. That is anything but true. This deck has always put up numbers and has been only getting tuned to be better and better. I think this deck is almost at the point where we were with with the other core decks that have been running on Modern. Essentially, this deck has just kind of gotten tuned to where it has the combo aspect and it still has a mid-range play that isn't terrible. We've seen a lot more Sentinel of the Nameless City and Voice of Resurgence and kind of combat, spot removal, as well as give us this incidental card advantage. Deck has been doing great. For anyone who's unsure of how this combo works or has any questions about it, briefly go over it. So Amalia has that whenever you gain life, see Explores, you combo that with Wild Growth Walker. So whenever a creature you control explores, you put a +1/+1 counter on him and you gain 3 life. So all you need is some way to trigger an Explore or gain a life, and you'll trigger Wild Growth Walker or Amalia, and then we'll just continue comboing off together. And then once Amalia gets to 20 power, exactly 20 power, she destroys all your other creatures, essentially. So you have Luminarch Veteran, so you can gain a life when you play Amalia, Wild Growth Walker, gain a life, trigger Amalia, trigger Wild Growth Walker. Same thing with Prosperous Innkeeper or Sea Note Scout will let you explore. Same thing with Sentinel of the Nameless City, makes a map. You can target one of your creatures to activate the map, explore, you gain 3 life with Wild Growth Walker, go off. And then we have a couple different ways to find our creatures. We have 4 Quarter Calling, 3 Collected Company, 1 Lively Dirge. If anyone doesn't know what this card is, it was kind of not a big boon to this deck, but was a really good addition to the deck where it's 2 or a black and a generic, and then for an additional 1, you can search your library for a card, put it into your graveyard and then shuffle. And then for another 2 mana, we can return up to 2 creature cards from the graveyard with mana value of 4 or less total. So with that, you can go search up for two-thirds of the combo and put it into your graveyard. We also have Return the Ranks to buy back our creatures that died. And 2 Extraction Specialists in the main as well to buy back creatures from the graveyard. So very resilient type deck here that has done a lot of work, and is not surprising that it has become a boogeyman or a second best deck in the format. Turns out, gaining 80 life is really good. And then some of you might be thinking, well, how do we win? Cool, I make a 20/20 Amalia, they play, Fatal Push, kill it, and pay 3 life. They're at 17, and I'm sure I'm at 90, but I have no board state, they have no board state, but they still have, they can attack me down from 90. That's not infinite life. So they are playing Aetherflux Reservoir as our second win con, essentially. It's a 4 mana artifact that basically says you may pay 50 life and deal 50 damage to any target. So deck has been super powerful. Not surprising to see that kind of take over the format. It's what I qualified for to get to DC. It's probably the deck I'm going to take to DC, barring any bans, because it's just super powerful, super consistent, and I think my build is a little bit better against the rest of the deck, against the rest of the meta. Obviously, I'm biased because, like every Magic player, I think I'm a 5-headed genius who, no guys, I've cracked it, you're all dumb. But we'll see what happens. I think something will get banned out of this deck, but I could be wrong, and I hope to be wrong and not wrong at the same time. And then Phoenix is the last of the top 3 decks we have here, which basically Picklock Prankster is the biggest addition to this deck. It's kind of what has made it so much more consistent. So before Picklock Prankster, we had to play cards like Pieces of the Puzzle. That was just so much worse. It was a 3-mana sorcery and put you, a turn farther behind. Picklock Prankster is a 2-mana instant. You get to mill 4 cards and return. And then you put an instant, a sorcery, or another fairy from those 4 cards into your hand and put the rest in the graveyard. So that helps fill Treasure Cruise. It helps put Harpalike Phoenix into the graveyard. It helps just kind of dig for our hate pieces out of our sideboard. It is a very good card overall. And then the other biggest addition was the Prof's Edict Memory. So that is a legendary enchantment for 2 mana, 1 in a blue. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. You have no maximum hand size, which doesn't really come up too much in Phoenix. You're always cycling through your hand. You're doing a lot of 1-for-1 cards and card selection. And then at the beginning of your combat, on your turn, you may, if you have drawn more than your starting card, basically, so more than your draw step card, you get to put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is -1 essentially. So if you've drawn 2 cards altogether, first card for turn, plus you play like an op this turn, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. It helps make our Picklock Pranksters into real threats because they are flying and vigilance. Helps make our Legislature even bigger. Helps pump our Harpalike Phoenix if we need to. It just gives us an extra additional damage. Really just makes your Picklock Pranksters into real threats. It also makes kind of like when you're digging and turning through your deck and you Treasure Cruise, you dig Treasure Cruise, considered opt, all these things, and you aren't bringing back Phoenix or anything. Well, now my Legislature, is a 7/7, or it can be 7/10. Something like that. It just makes your threat so much bigger and so much more resilient to any kind of damage-based removal, which is huge. As well as the sideboards kind of stay the same throughout. There's a couple numbers wax and wane, but almost always playing, Young Pyromancer and Crackling Drake for the graveyard hate. Some number of Ether Gust or Disdainful Stroke, Missile Dispute, and then Brotherhood's End and Anger of the Gods have been in the sideboard consistently. Notably, Anger of the Gods is very good against the Amalia decks because it exiles, so they can't get them back from the graveyard. And then Brazen Borrow has been making its way into the sideboards as a 1 or 2 of for at least the last 6 months, if not more. But deck is just very consistent. Does Treasure Cruise need to be banned? Possibly. I think Picklock Prankster would be another good one to ban out of this deck if you wanted to hit it and slow it down. Because Wizards has kind of said that they want Treasure Cruise in the meta. I don't know if that's the correct choice that Wizards needs to take a stand on, but it is something that they have said. So what needs to go, essentially? Do we need to ban Wild Growth Walker, Vein Ripper, Treasure Cruise? Fable and Mirror Breaker gets thrown out a lot to get banned in these type of decks to kind of shake up the meta. I understand the argument for Fable, so I'll kind of break that down real quick. Basically, people want Fable and Mirror Breaker banned, so it makes mid-range not have to be red. Fable is so good at what it does that there's a hard-pressed reason not to be red. Like, you got to find a legitimate reason of why you don't want to be red in mid-range if you're playing the mid-range deck. So I do see the argument for banning Fable, mainly just to shake up the meta more. I do think that if they want to ban Amalia deck out of the format, I think that we should ban Wild Growth Walker. I think Amalia is an interesting card. As a whole, I kind of like the card. There's a lot of games I've won where I've just beat down with a 5/5 Amalia because I gained a life here, gained a life here, gained a life here, and just kind of made her bigger over time. I would like to see Wild Growth Walker banned instead of Amalia just to keep her in the format. Because outside of us making another Wild Growth Walker, there's not going to be something that's going to combo off and do what it's doing now. Vein Ripper I think needs to go. I think that is something. I think that realistically, I think we need to ban Wild Growth Walker. We need to hit Amalia. She has kept down the aggro decks too much to where aggro can't pop up anymore. I think Vein Ripper needs to go. Or actually, I lied. I don't think Vein Ripper needs to go. I think Sorin needs to go. He's more the problem child. Vein Ripper is fine as a whole if you're casting him for 6 mana. I'm not upset. It's when you're putting him into play on turn 3 or my turn 2, and I'm like, cool, man, I don't even have a 1-drop out. I still need to get a creature out. I still need to get something else out. It's a lot of work to deal with this. Not to mention, decks can you can respond to the ward trigger. So if I go to remove your Vein Ripper with insert removal spell and have 1 creature on the board, and they go cool in response, in response to the ward trigger, I'm gonna I'm gonna fatal push your creature. Now you can't play the ward cost. Now you've wasted your removal spell. Your creature's already dead. You've lost 2 life. You're just so far behind that game. It's not funny. So I do think that we need to get rid of Sorin or Vein Ripper. One of the two. I think Sorin is a better choice. I can see Wizards banning Vein Ripper because the Wizards is what they do. Treasure Cruise is another one that I think might need to go. I think it's time for it to go. I think Phoenix has been so powerful for so long and so consistent that we kind of need to see it broken up. That being said, I think if we do ban Treasure Cruise, I like to see Iteration unbanned. I think that was a problem with having Treasure Cruise with Iteration being too powerful. Obviously, these are all pipe dreams of what I think will happen, what I hope will happen. I don't know. I have no inside track on Wizards. If I did, I definitely wouldn't be making videos. I'd be making a lot more money doing something else. But that being said, I do think this is what needs to happen. I think we need to see Wild Growth Walker gone. I think either Vein Ripper or Sorin needs to be banned, and I think Treasure Cruise is probably another one that needs to either hit or possibly Picklock Prankster. The deck is just a little too consistent, a little too powerful, and it's something that needs to be taken down just a slight peg. So I think if you want to not kill the deck, you take out Picklock Prankster if you kind of want to kill it, or make Phoenix not so powerful. Essentially, you need to take out Treasure Cruise. These are my thoughts on what I think needs to happen. Otherwise, I fully expect DC to look like Amalia, Phoenix, and Amalia, Phoenix, and Vampires, along with Blue-White probably doing surprisingly well, just because it's going to have a very tuned sideboard and main deck to what it needs to face, or what it knows it's going to face, and what it knows it needs to beat. But let me know what you guys think. What you guys think is going to happen. Do we think DC is going to be just essentially 3 big decks plus Blue-White control? Do you think there's going to be massive bannings or unbannings? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. And as always, guys, if you want to support the channel, you like what you're seeing, you like what I'm doing, go ahead and leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you guys next time.